Welcome to Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. I'm your host, Dr. Alan Christensen. Look, you know that between the latest online fads and the crazy media headlines, it's easier than ever to get confused about your health. And you and I just want to feel better and live longer. We want to know what works. And we can't wait for further studies. We need to make decisions today based on the best evidence we've got. Well, that's exactly what this show is here for. So let's get to it.
Hi there, this is Dr. Linda Kashaba from Integrative Health. Would you like some help with your thyroid? We would absolutely love to help you out. And guess what? We can even do remote care. Please call us today at 480-657-0003 to set up your first appointment. If you mention code podcast20, you will get 20% off from your first visit. That phone number again is 480-657-0003, and the code is podcast20. Can't wait to meet you.
Hey, Dr. C here with you. So you might have just finished a workout, maybe you're doing one right now. So what do you do afterwards? Do you rush out and suck down a protein shake or maybe a Powerade or something? You hear a lot about the importance of fueling pre and post your workout. You got to get the right stuff, not the wrong stuff. Do you do it fasted? Lots of questions out there and many points that have not been made very clear for people. So I pulled in a buddy to talk through this, Ben Greenfield. Ben's a former bodybuilder, Ironman triathlete, pro obstacle course racer, human performance consultant, author of 11 books, including Beyond Training, which is excellent. I enjoyed that quite a bit. If you've thought anything about health or fitness, you know about Ben Greenfield. He's like a force of nature. Ben and I had a great talk about this topic and got to a lot of clarity. And it turns out it's quite a bit simpler than we might have thought for most of us. But please enjoy this time with Ben Greenfield. Hey, Dr. C here with you. Welcome to another episode of Medical Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales. And back with a good friend that's commonly known as Winnie the Pooh.
Well, I had to it said to type your name in when I showed up to record, and Ben just seemed too boring. So that was the first thing that came to my mind was Winnie the Pooh. Sorry.
You may know him as Ben Greenfield, but I call him Winnie the Pooh.
I like honey, so there's that.
Tigger was pretty cool. I was always a big fan of Tigger.
Yeah, I would say that, probably Tigger was my favorite. But I don't quite have as much bouncy energy as he does because my flight got in about 2 a.m. last night. So I'm feeling a little bit more Winnie the Pooh than Tigger this morning.
So Winnie the Pooh, but not quite Eeyore.
No, definitely not Eeyore. No.
That's cool.
No, Alan, not Eeyore.
That would have been a real drag.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, people have been talking back and forth about how do they best fuel their performance? And this is a big question for many people who are just trying to get into exercise. They want to enjoy it and recover well. But there's a few people that listen to me that are also athletes, and they're struggling back and forth on what's most effective. So this would be a fun thing to talk through. And, you've got a lot of great experience and insights on this. So, yeah. I thought we'd kick off by what you would say for someone who's not athletic, but getting back into exercise and just that, wanting to have their best performance and recover quickest and less apt to injure and all that.
Yeah, someone who's not athletic and just getting back into exercise, I would say that the top goal there would be to enhance mitochondrial efficiency and fat burning oxidation capacity during the day. And so while I would not make this recommendation for the hard charging athlete who is, say, training for an Ironman or a marathon or CrossFit or something like that, someone who's just starting to get back into shape typically does need to improve metabolic flexibility, often needs to lose a few pounds and upregulate fat burning. And so because of that, I actually don't really prioritize pre or post workout nutrition too heavily for that population. As a matter of fact, a lot of the advice given about, say, getting your whey protein and your carbohydrate shake in as soon as possible after you've set down that last weight or taken that last step on the treadmill, that is trickle down advice from professional sports, where refueling is extremely important because there is inevitably another workout or scrimmage or practice or competition occurring within about 8 hours. And if there is another workout or another hard effort that's going to be occurring within 8 hours after you've completed the first workout, it actually does appear that prioritizing post-workout nutrition is a smart thing to do because it tops off your glycogen levels and your available amino acid pool for that workout that's coming up. But if that's not the case, what research has shown is that by simply eating ad libitum according to appetite for the next 24 hours and just eating your regular meals timed when you would normally eat your regular meals, you actually don't really need to prioritize that post-workout nutrition as much as we've been led to believe that we do. There's no need to kind of swing into the Jamba Juice on your way out of the health club. Despite what you may have read in, men's or women's health magazine. Now,
that's a great myth right there. Thank you.
Yeah, when it comes to pre-workout, a researcher named Alan Argonne did some good studies on the available amino acids for repairing muscles after a workout. And it appears that if you have eaten prior to a workout, there again is no need to prioritize that post-workout fuel. Meaning if you're burping up whatever, overnight oatmeal or energy bar you had prior to a workout, again, no need to prioritize post-workout nutrition if your goal is, say, muscle gain or muscle recovery, rather than just energy replenishment. And so
prior, how do we define prior? Like how recent? And what about like working out on a morning fast for the average exerciser?
Yeah, exactly. When I say prior, it's typically about 2 hours, meaning,
okay.
Let's say if you've had lunch and then you have an afternoon workout, there's no need to have like a post-workout meal. For example, if your goal is muscle gain or maximizing protein synthesis, and there's definitely not a need for it if you're just, working out to lose weight or to get fit. Now, when it comes to the fasting component, the deal with the fasting is that it does appear that if you have a 12 to 16 hour overnight fast, and then you get up in the morning and you do a hard workout, you may actually have this hypercompensatory response that spikes the appetite the rest of the day. And so you need to be careful in that type of scenario. For people who are overnight fasted, I recommend that if they're going to work out in the morning, that they either do two things. If it's a hard workout, consume something that's going to stabilize the appetite afterwards. And the best thing I found for that is about 10 to 20 grams of amino acids. They're relatively non-insulinogenic. They allow for muscle protein repair and synthesis to occur, even if you're working out in an energy depleted state after an overnight fast. And they kind of satiate the appetite so you don't feel like you want to go out and have a giant omelet and a scone, slapping yourself on the back after you've done that morning CrossFit workout in a fasted state.
So you're talking about like a purified amino acid supplement as opposed to just like a few grams of protein.
Yeah, preferably essential amino acids, not branched chain amino acids, because the high amounts of leucine in branched chain amino acids seems to have a deleterious effect on insulin sensitivity. So essential amino acids are better than branched chains in that scenario. But for people who have the flexibility to perhaps do their hard workout, their high intensity interval training or weight training later in the day, I recommend that if you're going to do a morning fasted workout, that you do something a little bit more simple and aerobic, like an easy swim or a sauna session or some yoga or, a nice walk in the sunshine, preferably, barefoot, near a beach or on a dirt path. And, I'm a huge fan of that type of scenario. And with many of my clients who I work with for fat loss, I do have them do a 12 to 16 hour intermittent fast, typically closer to 12 hours for women and 16 hours for men. And at some point during that fast in the morning, do about a half hour of aerobic activity, typically combined with some type of cold immersion afterwards, like a cold shower or a cold water soak or jumping in a river or something like that. And that seems to really accelerate fat loss and also not cause that huge appetite for breakfast and lunch that like a hard fasted morning workout can cause, especially a hard fasted morning workout without something like amino acids in the system.
A gentle stroll, a scenic place, and connection with nature. Those are all really important elements you mentioned there. I want people to hear that.
Yeah. And so, ultimately, I think the best scenario for someone who's again not a competitive athlete, for whom that post-workout and pre-workout nutrition, which we can talk about, becomes a little bit more important, but someone who's just wanting to lose weight, burn fat, improve metabolic flexibility, etc. For most people who do that, I typically recommend some amount of carbohydrate mitigation during most of the day, included for the morning workouts, meaning not eating, like oatmeal and post-workout carbs for that morning routine, and continuing throughout the rest of the day with some amount of carbohydrate limitation up until the end of the day. And at the end of the day, I usually recommend people do something that's going to stabilize their insulin levels and upregulate glucose transporters, like an afternoon or evening workout, even if it's brief, preferably lifting weights or some kind of brief high-intensity interval training session, and then to save the majority of the carbohydrates for the end of the day. Meaning if you're going to have, say, 100 to 200 grams of carbohydrates, which is typically enough to top off your liver glycogen and your muscle glycogen levels if you're just the average exerciser who might be working out for, say, an hour a day. For the evening, you have your carbohydrates, your sweet potatoes, your yams, your red wine, dark chocolate, white rice, whatever the case may be, with dinner after having done an afternoon or evening workout. And if you can't do an afternoon or an evening workout, then I recommend a postprandial stroll for 15 to 30 minutes after dinner, again, to maintain insulin sensitivity and to keep that evening carbohydrate feed from spiking the blood glucose too excessively. And the beauty of that scenario is that by fueling your body in the evening, you get adequate glycogen levels on board for the next day's activities and workouts. Mm-hmm. But you stay in a state of beta oxidation or fat burning the entire day up until the evening without a lot of glycemic variability, without a lot of blood glucose fluctuations. And so you get that sweet spot of training metabolic flexibility by burning fat the entire day, topping off the carbohydrate levels at the very end of the day, preferably when you've induced a glucose-sensitive state. And then when you rinse, wash, and repeat that, it allows you to live a pretty active lifestyle, have access to carbohydrates and glycogen when you need to lift weights or do high-intensity interval training, and also have enough glucose on board to support normal endocrine and thyroid function and even, joint health. Your joints rely upon, sources of glucan, for example, for restoring joint health. And it's a really good scenario. And I think far more sustainable than, say, like a ketogenic diet or something like that to enhance metabolic flexibility. So technically the term for that would be kind of like a cyclic low carbohydrate or a cyclic ketogenic approach. Again, if you're the average person without a high priority placed on pre and post workout fueling.
Love it. The other big perk about that is maintaining cortisol integrity. That was pretty much exactly the recommendation for the adrenal reset diet. We did a clinical trial showing that model itself, with carbs pushed towards the evening, there's an inverse relationship between, of course, your carb intake and your insulin output, but then also cortisol. When someone's in too low blood sugar of a state, they need to take out glucose from stores, and cortisol helps to mediate that. So by having some good carbs in the evening, you're supporting the body's ability to down-regulate cortisol and therefore have proper melatonin synthesis and all the good things that come of that.
Yeah, exactly, including serotonin. That's the other nice thing about saving the carbohydrates for the evening rather than having them in the morning, which many people will do, is that it assists with sleep quite dramatically when people have that carbohydrate feed. Some pushback I've gotten on this before is based on the idea that the human natural circadian rhythm dictates that insulin sensitivity tends to be higher in the morning. And so people will say, well, why wouldn't I have all my carbohydrates in the morning? Well, that will take you out of that fat burning state for, a good 4 to 5 hours, or sometimes half your day, if you're having your smoothie or your overnight oatmeal or whatever the case may be in the morning. And the fact is, you can artificially induce insulin sensitivity in the afternoon or evening simply by doing some kind of movement session or a post-dinner stroll or something like that. So you can kind of have your cake and eat it too. You skip the carbohydrates in the morning, you save them for the evening, you sleep better, and you there are other ways to induce insulin sensitivity aside from just natural circadian rhythmicity.
And the other perk about that is there is a heightened insulin sensitivity that takes place within the liver itself during the wee hours of night. So it's a great way to get that liver glycogen back up again, which is essential for adequate beta oxidation, for burning the liver's triglycerides.
Yep, exactly.
So refueling windows. So for the non-athlete, probably not a big thing. They've got some options of leaving carbs till later, but the timing of food pre and post sounds like it's not too critical for the non-athlete.
No, it's not critical. And as a matter of fact, you can even see an accelerated or an increase in growth hormone and testosterone when you actually fast for a little while after a workout. So again, unless you're an athlete, for when post-workout fueling can be something that assists with muscle gain and that assists with the quality of the next workout that you might be doing during the day. Because again, many athletes are doing 2-a-day movement sessions or sometimes 3-a-day movement sessions. But if you don't fall into that category, then it becomes far less necessary. Now, if you're an athlete, things change. And there's definitely some considerations for athletes. So a few of the things to think about. Yes, there is a post-workout fueling window during which you're going to have highly upregulated insulin sensitivity and upregulated activity of glucose transporters responsible for shoveling substrates into tissue, such as muscle, to allow you to better perform in the next workout or the next competition. And it appears, based on most research, that eating about a 3-to-1 to a 4-to-1 ratio of carbohydrates to protein in a post-workout state, preferably as close to when you finish the workout as possible, is going to improve your performance in the next workout or the next competition later in the day, assuming that next workout or next competition is occurring within about 8 hours after that first movement session that you've done. So
the following day is not as essential. It's more so if it's going to be later that day, or
yeah. And again, if it's longer than 8 hours away from that workout that you've done, that post-workout fueling becomes far less of a priority. And again, by simply eating, your normal meal structure during the day, you'll be just fine. But most athletes are working out again. Usually within 8 hours after they finish that other workout. That's just very common amongst athletes. And furthermore, if it's like a high schooler who's trying to put on muscle, or a collegiate athlete who's playing football and needs to maintain or build muscle, that post-workout fueling scenario when protein synthesis is going to be upregulated is also very important. So that's a case in which a post-workout meal actually is important. But again, based on the research by Alan Argonne, if you've already had a pre-workout meal, even the post-workout meal for an athlete becomes less important. The problem I've run into is that, of course, the pre-workout meal can shovel a lot of blood into the gut and detract from performance and blood availability for, the appendages and for the muscles you're going to use during the workout. So, I tell athletes if they have to choose between the pre-workout meal and the post-workout meal, definitely the post-workout meal is more favorable for performance. And
I would think that'd be more comfortable as well.
Yeah, exactly. Something very light pre-workout, like a high glycemic index carbohydrate, like a potato or rice or a fast digesting gel or something like that, combined with amino acids, is a decent pre-workout solution that tends to be more easily digested and unless someone's really trying to gain weight or gain muscle, it's rare that I'll recommend both pre-workout and post-workout fueling. And then during the workout, I've worked with a lot of triathletes, marathoners, cyclists, swimmers, etc. And that's something that needs to be considered too, is during workout fueling.
Yeah.
Many of the substrates available to athletes for fueling during the workout are highly fermentable carbohydrates, or things that cause gas, bloating, digestive discomfort, etc. And what I'm referring to are the standard blends of fructose and maltodextrin-based gels or carbohydrate powders. Many of them are also relatively void in amino acids or proteins, which is kind of an issue because as your body runs low in its amino acid pools during exercise, you tend to get a high amount of muscle fiber breakdown, and this can result in tryptophan in the bloodstream. That tryptophan can cross the blood-brain barrier and result in central nervous system fatigue and tiredness, especially during a long workout or during a race like a marathon or an Ironman. And furthermore, many of these these packaged workout fuels, they're void in the substrates that an aerobic athlete often needs for fueling during a workout, particularly ketones or readily available sources of fats, such as medium chain triglycerides. And so based on all of that, my recommendation for any endurance athlete or anyone who's got a long workout or a long race, and by long, I mean anything that exceeds about 90 minutes.
More than about 90 minutes, okay.
Yeah, in that scenario, I recommend that there be some kind of less fermentable, easy to digest form of carbohydrate that you're consuming during that workout. And the sweet spot I've settled upon after looking at a lot of these slow release starches and maltodextrins, fructose, long chain carbohydrates, like there's a company called UCAN that makes this starch that was popular amongst a lot of ketogenic athletes, but that again I think causes a lot of gas and bloating.
Well, it makes sense in a non-exercise state, but during exercise you want to access those fuels more quickly.
Yeah, and it's highly fermentable too. So I like a potato-based starch. One company, and I'm not really affiliated with any of these companies, but one that I like is it's called Glycofuse. It's kind of like a potato-based dextrin fuel. Dextrose and dextrin-based fuels tend to result in less fermentation and a readily available source of carbohydrate during exercise. And so I start off by recommending for each hour, depending on the size of the athlete, about 100 to 150 calories of some kind of dextrose-based source. And I like something like that. Glycofuse. There are other companies using potato-based starches. There's one company called Millennium Sports that also does a potato-based starch, but that's not a lot of calories of carbohydrate compared to like what the Gatorade Sports Science Institute will recommend, which would be closer to like, a good 300 to 400 calories of carbohydrates per hour. But when combined with a few of the other things I'll mention to you, it's enough carbohydrates to give a slow bleed of glucose into the bloodstream and maintain energy levels for any surges that need to be done during a race or a long workout, like, standing on your bike to tackle a hill or doing a surge during, say, like a Spartan race to, jump over a wall or go through the monkey bars or something like that. The other things that need to be included with that carbohydrate would be, like I mentioned, some form of amino acids. And I recommend that you consume, along with the carbohydrates per hour, about 10 grams of essential amino acids. That will stave off the central nervous system fatigue that can occur from the muscle breakdown and the tryptophan release from that muscle breakdown. And that also allows for less soreness and faster recovery after, if you can keep amino acids going into the bloodstream during that long workout. And again, most of these recommendations are really going to be for, primarily endurance athletes or people who are working out for a long time.
So portability, portability, palatability? What's the most effective way for consuming those amino acids?
The best way to do what I'm describing right now is to take each of the ingredients that I'm describing and to simply mix them together into one of those portable flasks or into a water bottle with water.
Got it.
And you can use a 20 to 24 ounce water bottle and mix all this stuff together, and it works pretty well. The third component, in addition to the carbohydrates and the protein, would be an easy to digest fat that does not require digestion. And typically that's going to be either a medium chain triglyceride or a ketone source. Most of the Tour de France athletes, for example, and there was some media about this of late, they're using exogenous ketones, either ketone esters or ketone salts. And although those are more expensive than MCT oil or MCT-based fats, they're a little bit more digestible and far more efficacious in terms of being a readily available source of a fat type of fuel for that stable, long-term energy. So into that water bottle, along with the preferably potato-based fuel and essential amino acids, you add a serving of ketone salts, a serving of ketone esters, or if that's difficult on the budget, a serving of MCTs, like an MCT powder or an MCT oil. So that's your third component. And then the final thing you'd want to take into consideration is electrolytes. And I like adding an electrolyte powder to the water bottle along with those other three things that I mentioned. Typically something like, there's a lot of companies that do electrolyte powders, honestly. I like the one I've been using of late is Thorne's electrolyte product. I think that one's called Catalytes. But yeah, you just do about a powdered serving of that along with the water bottle. So all of a sudden, in that bottle for during a workout, you've got easy to digest carbohydrates that don't ferment and cause gas and bloating, especially over a long workout. You've got essential amino acids to stave off central nervous system fatigue. You have ketones as a slow burning source of fuel that's also readily available for many of the organs you use during an endurance event, like the diaphragm, the brain, the heart, etc. And then finally, you have electrolytes. And you just mix all that together in a water bottle or a flask. And that's the blend that I've used successfully for a lot of the marathoners, the triathletes, the cyclists, et cetera, that I work with. And it just burns clean and provides this nice, steady source of fuel that I think is far superior to, say, like just using a fructose or a maltodextrin-based gel, for example. There are some marathoners or triathletes that don't like to run with flasks, that don't like to run with water bottles. And so let's say I'm working with an Ironman who comes off the bike and they want to switch to a different source of fuel. Typically in that scenario, I'll recommend any of these newer fat-based energy gels. Like many energy gels now are made with chia seeds. They're made with nut butters. They're made with cacao oil or like a coconut oil mixed with cacao. And I think those are much better. They're typically a good slow burning source of fuel that doesn't ferment. And so they'll switch to that as what they use during the run portion of the event. And the only thing to consider with any of these gels is they're highly concentrated sources of fuel versus that mix that I mentioned earlier that's typically in a water bottle. And because of that, if you're going to consume those, you always want to make sure that you're doing it when you have access to water. Like when you're passing an aid station during a race, that's when you would consume the gel, chase it with about 4 to 6 ounces of water, and then keep running, because otherwise you can get kind of a rush of blood into the gut and some gut discomfort if you just have one of these gels by themselves.
So is that going to be then a fat source without carbohydrate in those contexts?
A lot of these gels, they do have like trace amounts of carbohydrates in them. But yeah, it's not a lot of carbohydrates in those. Typically for like an Ironman athlete, I'll have them consume a gel like that up until about the half marathon mark. Same thing for a marathoner. And then once they reach the half marathon or so, that's usually when I'm having them turn up the speed anyways and begin to really go highly glycolytic and a little bit more anaerobic. And
negative split.
And that point, I find the negative split to be, really an Ironman or a marathon is basically just management of the body up until that half marathon point. And then when it's really time to pull the ripcord, I'll have them just switch to the on-course source of carbohydrates, which are typically like those little, Cliff blocks, Coca-Cola, et cetera. That's when you begin to break all the rules and just shove carbohydrates and caffeine down the hatch like crazy as you're running as fast as you can. But you save that until like the very end of the race.
And that's kind of a funny concept. People often balk at that, but the things that are most useful in that moment are not the same as what's useful during day-to-day life when you're not pushing it that hard.
Well, I mean, let's face it, if you want to live a completely natural lifestyle, you're going to eat largely, paleo or ancestral or primal sources of fuel, which are just fine if you're walking slowly, hiking, hunting, gathering, etc. But if you have decided that what makes you happy is to do something relatively unnatural that, in our ancestral days would have been relegated to the realm of the gladiator, the warrior, the athlete, etc., sometimes you need an unnatural means to achieve that. And that includes using a lot of these modern so-called Frankenfuels. And I'll get some pushback on that. People will say, well, why don't I just use berries and potatoes and honey? Well, just try to take berries and potatoes and honey into an actual marathon or an actual Ironman triathlon or a Spartan race. And you've basically got, 2 extra pounds of fuel strapped around your waist or stuffed down your jersey. And it's just not aerodynamically or biomechanically appropriate.
It's not going to work good for the photos either.
No.
So you do coaching. I just want to mention that. People are hearing this and many have heard about you and they can work with you directly and you can be like their coach and guide them. When you are working, and we're going to have the links in the show notes for that, but when you are working with people, what are some of the biggest misconceptions you see about people and their nutrition relative to their physical activity? Like what's the most common thing that when you start out with someone like, oh, wow, we can just change this and get so much benefit, this low-hanging fruit?
For fat loss and metabolic efficiency, elimination of the pre and post-workout meal that most people are just convinced that they have to have, and instead morning fasted workout, and then just basically breakfast, lunch, and dinner as the main 3 meals of the day with very little snacking between. And if anything, if their schedule dictates that they need to do their hard workout in the morning in that fasted state, just a small amount of amino acids prior to that morning workout. Sometimes some ketones can work as well. Those are more expensive, but that's something some folks will do, is not just the amino acids, but also the ketones. But ultimately kind of shattering that pre and post workout myth for the people who really aren't athletes and aren't bodybuilders and who are just doing, a basic morning workout or afternoon workout. Also, as we mentioned earlier, that idea that, if I'm active, I need to have carbohydrates with breakfast or early in the day. Really not the case. You'll be relying upon the carbohydrates that you've had with dinner for that. And then, I guess the main thing is just this idea of snacking and grazing throughout the day because you've been working out. I have so many people who I work with who just can't seem to get rid of that last little bit of fat around the waistline, and look at their diet and they're just kind of mindlessly grabbing a handful of raw almonds here, or maybe when they're shopping at Whole Foods, stopping off at a few of the sample tables, and before they know it, they've left the grocery store and consumed 300 extra calories. And essentially every time that you stop to snack, you're ripping your body out of that state in which it's tapping into its own sources of fuel for energy. And I'm a big fan of long periods of time between meals, lots of intermittent fasting, and just this idea that even if you're active, that doesn't mean you need to mindlessly shove small amounts of calories down the hatch throughout the day. And it really helps with metabolic efficiency when people can just be highly cognizant of their caloric intake and the frequency of feedings during the day, lower those feedings to as few as possible, like 2 to 3 feedings during the day, and then just, consume non-calorie sources of I guess gastric enjoyment, such as like, stevia and sparkling water, or Zevia, or a tea, or different forms of coffee, et cetera, during the day. Small use of things like ketones or amino acids pre-workout for a fasted workout if they're concerned about getting hungry, or if that morning fasted workout is very hard. And, those are some of the bigger changes I'll make.
That's awesome. Something else I want to recommend to people. I really enjoyed the book Beyond Training. I got that from you several years ago. You brought that to an event that we were both at, and tons of great stuff in that. And I'm excited you got a new one coming out, Superhuman RX book. Any insights you can tell us on what we can expect in that one?
Yeah, actually, the original name of the book was Superhuman RX, but one of my friends actually came out with a book called Superhuman, and I didn't want to overlap too heavily with his book. So the name of the book is actually Boundless. You can check it out at boundlessbook.com, but it's essentially a massive 600-page guide to boundless energy for the body, boundless energy for the mind. And there's even a lot about spirituality, happiness, purpose, relationships, gratitude, etc. in there. So it's just kind of the book I've always wanted to write for optimizing mind, body, and spirit. So unlike Beyond Training, it is less focused on athletics and exercise and more focused on just general happiness and this ultimate mix of lifespan and health span.
And I'm sorry, that is out or that's coming out? Or
it's coming out in January. Okay. It actually just went live for pre-order on Amazon yesterday.
Okay.
So you can find it on Amazon.
Great
if you
timing.
search for Boundless Ben Greenfield, it should come up.
Great. We'll get that link in there too. All right, Ben, any closing words of insight or inspiration for our people? This has been great stuff.
You know, I think that about covers it. Yeah, you know, those are the main things. And I guess if you guys want to, there's plenty of nutrition articles and pre and post workout tips and all sorts of stuff I've got on my website at bengreenfieldfitness.com. And, you know, it's a constant learning process for me. I'm incredibly blessed to be able to interview people on my podcast and learn more about this stuff. It's like I get a college education every week talking to all these smart people on my show. And so, you know, things are constantly changing in nutrition, but ultimately, I guess the last thing that I'd caution people against is when you read nutrition or dietary recommendations in popular media and literature, understand that much of that is based on the prevailing idea that our body needs large amounts of carbohydrates and we need to just shove malted dextrin and fructose down the hatch willy-nilly during exercise based on, you know, what the Gatorade Sports Science Institute or what companies like Power Bar or Cliff Bar might tell you. And just take that all with a grain of salt.
For the electrolytes, right?
For the electrolytes, that's right.
All right, thanks so much. Thanks for everyone for being with us, and we'll see you again real soon. Hey, Dr. Christensen here. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode. Is there a topic you'd like me to cover? I'd love to hear from you. Just go to Dr. Alan Christensen on Facebook or Instagram, write your question, and use the hashtag #MedicalMyths. Did you find this show helpful? If so, please take a minute and leave us a rating on iTunes so that others can know. Thanks much. I'll be back with you real soon. Bye-bye.